This is a short film made for the Stirling University course that had recently an event looking at Scottish independent magazines now and then in October 2021, which I was supposed to make a presentation at and unaccountably missed because I put the event in on the wrong date in my diary. So this is the presentation I should have made. I'm not smart enough to produce this as a film, so I'm just scrolling through the PowerPoint and hope that this makes sense. The reason that we chose that title, there was a bunch of about 5 women in the 1990s, 1991, who gathered and decided we were really bored with what was on offer for women, pretty much carved out of every title, whether it was alternative, radical, mainstream, or women's reading, which tended to be very lifestyle stuff centered around the advertising, and that just wasn't interesting to any of us, and we were pretty sure we weren't alone. We picked the name Harpies and Quines as a deliberate kind of mockery of Harpies and Quines, the well-known, extremely posh women's magazine, and also because it meant something to us. Harpies, the Greek mythological creatures who plucked men to the afterlife, was one extreme that women tend to inhabit, seen if they criticise or critique anything as just shrill harridans. And on the other hand, innocent and kind of as the day is long, quines, which is one of the few words, along with lass in Scots, which has relatively few pejorative associations as a word to describe young women. So there we are, fresh as the driven snow, or just evil bitches, to be blunt. Those were the two extremes, to quote Hugh McDermott, where feminists used to meet. You know, we live between those spaces of those extremes. So we thought Harpies and Quines was quite a good title. And actually, while some people were a bit worried that national magazines might act on the similarity to their title, I was rather counting on it because we had no money for publicity. The only cash that had been put into the magazine was 3,000 quid that my mum put in. Apart from that, we had nothing. So it proved, actually. Oh yes, and there we are, just showing that the Scots has many connections with Nordic Scandinavian languages. I should just backtrack a second and say that for me, all of this came from a prior experience when I was at Oxford University, and similarly thought then, why is there not a decent title for just something for women to read who are kind of activists? So we produced this magazine Lilith, which was named after the mythical first wife of Adam who refused to lie beneath him. As you can see, the production values were extremely low. We mostly just jumped onto whatever offset litho machine we could and just turned off as many copies as we could before we were noticed, pretty much. However, the title did continue for, I understand, about 13 years and became a lot more professional in its production, although I think it too has now ceased to trade. That was what pretty much sparked Harpies and Quines. I came back up the road in the 1990s to Scotland and thought, well, hang on a minute, if a wee town like Oxford can sustain a monthly feminist magazine, why on earth can the whole of Scotland not manage that? And we were so fortunate in gathering a group together who were incredibly talented, and also a couple of guys who were great designers. Can't quite remember actually who produced this one, but there was a huge emphasis on trying to marry up the Celtic knotwork, the Gaelic traditions of the kind of almost Celtic past with the new ideas, as it were, about feminism. So that was the kind of motif that we kind of enjoyed to put forward. We had quite a lot of classy looking front pages. We embraced the zero tolerance campaign that was launched around the same time. We had 3 years of publication. This gave you an idea of some of the layout inside. Tremendous work done on the layout, actually. This was a piece about Germaine Greer, who was perfectly happy with that as a headline, by the way. And we lasted for 3 years. Our big problem was not freedom of speech, it was freedom to distribute. Every month I wrote an editorial pointing out that our difficulty lay in the fact that if we approached a newsagent to just take stocks of Harpies and Quines, we were told invariably that the main distributor, Menzies, John Menzies, had said that if they took supplies from anyone else at all, the mains, titles, daily newspapers would stop being sent. So essentially they had to choose between wee efforts like ours and the big kind of John Menzies daily distribution. Obviously, we wouldn't have existed unless quite a few places in every city decided, nobody will notice, and took 10, 12, 20 more sometimes magazines. And indeed, there was never any problem, to be fair to them, with John Menzies complaining. However, it was the alternative to go through an official distributor like that would have taken pretty much 50% of the cover price, and we wouldn't have seen the money for 3 months. And that alone would just have ended any alternative magazine. Nobody could survive like that. So we distributed these by hand. I distributed quite a lot of them myself, just driving round the cities, Stirling, Perth, Aberdeen, Inverness even. It was quite a Herculean effort, but at least it left me with a deep knowledge of the one-way systems of our main cities. And we managed to last 3 years like that. Actually, we were doing not badly at the end, and we decided to go monthly. At that point, we were producing every 2 months, some on subscriptions, some through shops. And then we decided to go monthly with an official distributor, not Menzies. And then we just ran aground. Basically, we just couldn't manage to take enough money in to make that work. We had some quite salacious titles, which definitely got picked up by others. This spot was one that I wrote every month with contributions and suggestions from readers. And let me tell you, there were plenty suggestions for who had said the most misogynist thing that month. Channel 4's The Girly Show picked this idea up once we had gone down the tubes. And we had a publicity launch when we went monthly with this, again, deliberately provocative advertising, which was also towed around on a truck around Glasgow and on 48-sheet billboards, and probably managed to annoy just about everybody at the time. But again, certainly got noticed, but just couldn't manage to overcome the difficulties of that distribution problem. So Harpies went down the tubes. Although the idea of women producing their own publications stayed with me personally. I was the assistant editor of the Scotswoman in 1995 and had this idea to do a Scotswoman that was produced only by the female staff on International Women's Day, which certainly again made its mark. The following year, the same thing happened in a tabloid version of the paper. And the year after that, Andrew Neil became managing editor of all the titles at the Scotsman, and that was the end of any kind of fun like this with supplements which were trying to show a different editorial line. But again, that wasn't totally the end of that either. A lot of African journalists had spotted the Scotswoman, loved the idea and wanted to do it themselves. None of them were high enough up their own newspapers' hierarchies to do a change, and many of them needed training in journalism. So I set up a charity, Africa Woman, which ran for 7 years with funding from the British Council, who also generously gave us space in their network of offices across Africa. And the gals would come into the offices, you learn how to use the internet, which at that point in the late 90s, early 2000s was not something that was widespread in Africa, and produce an online paper between them that day, which was laid out in the form of a paper like this, which sometimes became a printed out paper, as this one was during the G8 summit here in Scotland, and also in the Earth Summit in Johannesburg. So that ran for about 7 years, and then it too bit the dust. Today, I wonder what anybody starting again, thinking about a sort of Harpies and Quines would do. I personally do a podcast with Pat Joyce here, which is every week we look at all sorts of news together. And you can find it also at my website, which is a bit of a kind of come all ye site for all my writing, and also links to the films that I've made with other people, the podcasts that I do with other people. So I guess now my life has become more of a sort of collection, a basket almost of all sorts of different ventures with different people. I've got to say though, I totally do miss the excitement of the atmosphere around Harpies and Quines. That might have been just a time in my life, because I'm trying to think now, I'm just early 30s when we did that. Maybe that's something, but I think and I know that that Mike at Bella Caledonia is managing really well to create the sort of equivalent of that buzz of ideas that comes when a set of people keep meeting. I mean, we met sometimes every 2 weeks for years, physically meeting, and that was the level of energy and commitment and physical face-to-faceness that kind of seemed to be needed to keep Harpies on the road. So I doubt somehow that if we were starting again, we would have come out with a physical magazine, mostly given the distribution problems, which have not changed. The great triumph of the internet in every different form and podcasting is the freedom to distribute. Of course, you then have to make yourself be seen and be known, but at least you have got an even chance, which was simply not there back in the 90s with Harpies and Quines. Of course, every time there's a presentation like this, people get in touch and say, oh, could we do this again? And I say to them, listen, I'm 61, you're not. So if you want to do a magazine, if you have confined a little fulcrum of people that really want to produce something, whether online or otherwise, then absolutely I'll be delighted to help. But it takes I think the energy of a new generation to sustain it. And I hope in a way that's there, whether it's a physical product or an online product. It's certainly a completely life-changing thing to get involved in this, to get immersed actually in this whole world. And I don't regret my time with Harpies and Quines, and really miss that level of interaction.